Here we go. We're in the middle of chapter 7, Hayichud v'Amunah. We are talking here, so to speak, finally, as the Alter Rebbe introduces it, that we are now ready to address the core objective of Hayichud v'Amunah, which is the explanation of this term that Shema Yisrael, the ultimate declaration, is referenced as Yechuda Ilah, translation supernal unity, which of course we will nuance out, and the Baruch Shen Kavod Machusai Le'elam Voed, which is the inserted line that is not in the Chumash, that is Yechuda Tata, that is the lower level. Now, when we say higher and lower, as we have explained, it doesn't mean better and worse. It means two different perspectives: the perspective from Hashem, that there is nothing separated, and the perspective from human beings, that we are surrendered to Hashem. We are familiar with the term yesh mi'ayin, translation something from no thing, which strikes us as ironic because that suggests that we are something and Hashem is nothing. And yet, as we have talked about, what that means is Hashem is not a thing. He's not measurable. In contrast, we might say that we are ayin and we come from yesh. We are not a true thing because we don't have independent sustainability and existence. We are continuously being created, not only maintained, created by the infinity of Hashem. And that infinity of Hashem is continuously giving us our existence. So we are not an innate thing. We are a no thing. We are the product of a something. We are ayin miyesh. And we started to talk about this quote that we have seen before. It originates in the Medrash Tanchuma and Parshas Nasai, that says that the whole purpose of creation, why are we here? Is it for our benefit? And our answer is, it is ultimately for Hashem's purpose. God's innate, and he uses this word desire, and that's the key, is a dwelling place, a welcoming place here in this least naturally associated aspects of Hashem, with this world, where God is least naturally aware, or we are least naturally aware of God. We've talked about this in many contexts, the different worlds, the different stages of awareness. And this world is the least naturally aware, or least naturally intuitively aware of the infinity of Hashem. And we specifically started to talk last week, and this is what we're going to pick up on. So I don't know exactly how to identify it. If you have sort of the old-fashioned print of the Tanya, it's page 162. It's not the beginning of a chitas, so I don't know exactly how to identify it, but it's about 8 or 10 lines down from the top of the chapter. And the phrase in Hebrew is De'ein melech below am. There is no king without a nation. So if you got the Hebrew English, or you got the lessons in Tanya, or you have the Rabbi Miller version, or what, all the different versions, I don't know how to exactly identify it, but I hope that you can find it. If somebody can tell us where it is specifically in the lessons in Tanya, maybe that would be helpful.
It's on page 909 at the bottom for this one. For
the old-fashioned lessons in Tanya. If you have the new lessons, there's just so many different publications, thank God, so it's hard to identify. So it's the Ein Melech Below Am. This is a common quote that Hashem has the desire to be a king. You know, we're just to take a moment, we're in this time when the king is in the field, and we've talked about this last week. Why would Hashem want to be a king? Isn't that a degradation? Isn't that a demotion? Because Hashem is God, king. I mean, the president doesn't want to be the mayor. Why would Hashem want that? So we explain, because a king is an interpersonal relationship, meaning if nobody showed up on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem is still the boss. He's still the absolute authority. What Hashem wants is to be connected with the people as a king. Now, in order to be a king, you have to have an Am. Now, the word Am, we're familiar with it, Am Yisrael. It means a nation, but more specifically, it comes from the similar phrase for smoldering coals. Amamiyos. One say, what does smoldering coals have to possibly do with the status of nationhood? And so we explain that amamiyos, smoldering coals, is the term for the least naturally, intuitively aligned with godliness. That is, if a person is very aware of the king, again, it's hard for us a little bit to get our arms around it. The Rebbe writes about this in a letter for Rosh Hashanah because our upbringing sees kings as just fascist dictators and self-serving and indulgent and this sort of detached monarchs. But if we really imagine the concept of a king, I mean, we point to the idea of a Rebbe or in some other context. So the people who are on the inside, well, of course, they appreciate the king because their status is elevated by the king. This is why the angels can't be the fulfillment of Hashem's desire, because they are so obviously aligned with Hashem that their affirmation of Hashem is ultimately an affirmation of themselves. You know, the vice president is only the vice president because the president is the president. So, of course, the vice president is rooting for the president because without the president, the vice president doesn't get to be the vice president. In contrast, when you have the ordinary folk who have no intuitive impulse to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem, and on the contrary, their natural state is to be self-absorbed, and they override their natural intuitive sense of what's in it for me-ism. They override their natural sense of, well, this is what I like and this is what I want to do. Instead, to be committed to Hashem, it's sort of like the concept of the Baal Tshuva versus the Tzaddik, meaning the person who's raised in holiness has a natural intuitive alignment with holiness. You know, it's like the classic thing. Well, of course, you want Mashiach because then you get to do all the things you like to do. But the people who are not currently doing that, and they don't want to give up whatever their impulses are, as if nobody has impulses that may have to overcome, that we're all tzaddikim. That's the more difficult and therefore the greater accomplishment. So the person who, quote unquote, is not compelled by their societal circumstances to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem, and they become aligned with the infinity of Hashem, that's the characteristic of Am. That's a genuine melech. Again, it's important, and it's hard for us, as I mentioned, it's important that we understand the difference between a melech and a dictator. Because a dictator is just a bully, and he forces you to comply, and you really have no choice. Whereas a melech, well, a melech is a voluntary, both on the king's part as well as on the people's part. And without that voluntary characteristic, there really is no sense of any form of a relationship. And that's what it says. Perish am miloshin oimimos. When we say am, we mean the smoldering coals. Shem dvarim nefradim. And now it describes the distance, the sort of innate distance that the Am has from the Melech and why it's so meaningful when they overcome that innate difference. And the Alter Rebbe here uses three adjectives. He says, they are nefradim, they are separate, they're outside. That's why, and again, Torah allows us to use this terminology. Hashem had to, of course, it doesn't have to do anything, but in order to achieve this objective, Hashem had to create something outside of himself. Vizorim, and they are strangers, so they don't have this innate bias. As the Alter Rebbe will play it out, that a person can't be the king over their children, like my president, vice president, or over the angels. And they are rechoikim. They're not in the inner circle. So Hashem subjects himself to us, just as we are subjected to people who don't recognize who we are. We have to sort of win them over. And again, we're not studying the contemporary times, but with Rosh Hashanah, you know, in our not so far off plans, one of the aspects of Rosh Hashanah is that we get to renew our relationship. But there's a certain potential downside. We don't have to renew it. Don't you know who I am? Doesn't my reputation count for anything? Doesn't my life history? Well, no. You got to sort of prove yourself. You got to renew it every day. It's got to be a constant awakening every single day. So yes, there's the virtue of the opportunity to get a fresh start. There's also the burden, challenge of having to have a fresh start. Well, this is the characteristic that Hashem wants from us. The fact that we are not compelled. What's going to happen if I don't? You're going to reach down from heaven and no, you're not. So it's purely voluntary. If it's purely voluntary, then it becomes meaningful. Mimailas hamelech. They can't be on the inner circle. They have to be, again, detached, estranged, and distant from the character of the king. Why? Even if a person had many children, an exceeding amount, he couldn't call that a king. Now we see this, it's sort of the idea in the most extreme of buying friends. Sure, if I buy everyone pizza, they'll be my friend. But they're not really my friend, because as soon as I stop buying them pizza, they stop being my friend. So the presentation that I have somehow been affirmed falls apart when I no longer have anything to offer them. So this cuts to the classic thing. Well, what's in it for you? Why do you like Shabbos? Why do you like it? What does it do for you? Now, of course, hopefully we think it does many wonderful things for us. We're not against that. We're not looking for it to be unpleasant. And yet we don't say, well, we keep Shabbos because I like it. Because what's going to happen one week when I don't like it? So then I don't have to do it. What's going to happen one week if it's not pleasant? And this is why, again, it always ties back to the Mesiras Nefesh angle, et cetera, et cetera. It is specifically the fact that it is in the service of something greater. There is a story, maybe it's even a true story, that in the early 50s, there were many Jews who had survived the war. They'd come to the United States, and they had no community. Their communities had been completely eradicated. They grew up in these small little towns in Poland and wherever it was, and they had no place. So they went looking. So they went to see all the different places. Where did they fit in? So you had many people who came from Chassidish communities, but they didn't have their community. Their community was gone. So they looked around, they came here and they came there, and they tried it out because it was more familiar to them. The idea of being around a Rebbe and Yiddish and so on. Some came to Lubavitch, some came to other communities because they already had somewhat of a community. So the story goes that one such Chassidish Yid came and he had a private audience with the Rebbe. And as often happens, he had a suggestion. I have a better idea. What was his better idea? So he said to the Rebbe, there's all these people like myself. They're all sort of lost, but they're looking for what they remember from their upbringing. And to them, a Rebbe wears a strimal. So if the Rebbe would wear a strimal, he would attract many more Hasidim. It would be a good marketing tool. I mean, he didn't use my cynical terminology, but that was his basic message. It would be meaningful to these people. And as the story goes, whether it's true or not, it seems to illustrate a point that is true. The Rebbe said, yes, but how many of the Shema Hatzair, which was a very Zionistic, totally secularized movement, how many of those people will become interested if I'll put on a strimal? Meaning, the objective is not the people who are already 92% of the way there. And now maybe we can swing them over to our side. We can market to them. The question is, how many of the people who are so distant seemingly and so, again, these three words, separated, estranged, and distant, will want to come and participate? Or will that just further chase them away? So it, again, illustrates this basic idea that Hashem's desire is to be melech, again, relationship, and melech means in a connected relationship with those who are not intuitively predisposed to being connected with you. Even if he had all officers, all inner circle people, all chiefs and no Indians. So of course they all want to be participatory because it's to their benefit. They're all ministers and so on and so forth. They've hooked their train to this person thinking that it's going to promote their career. That's not called the melech, because each guy there is out for what's in it for me, they all want to sort of hang out in the shade of this exalted person, because it then enriches their stature and personality. Rak b'roiv am dafka hadras melech. So this is a not uncommon phrase. We're familiar with it, that it's through the abundance of the people that the king is glorified. This is not only a sort of cliche, but it also has some halachic ramifications. One example, which we're all familiar with, is about when we should schedule. An example is a bris. So there's two biases. One is you should do it first thing in the morning, because we want to show, the first moment that you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, you should do it. So we should schedule a bris first thing in the morning. That's one suggestion. Another suggestion is, well, if you schedule it early in the morning, less people will come. So it's better to schedule it later in the afternoon when more people will come. What about the virtue of doing things first at the first opportunity? Well, there's another virtue. What's that other virtue? And that's this quote here. B'roiv am, with a lot of people, we glorify the king. The king is more glorified if there's many people. Yes, it's true that we'd have to worry about not just Am Yisrael, but every single Yisrael, every single person, no question about it. It's not a numbers game. And yet there is a desire for there is a virtue, there is an enrichment if there's many people. Now, you can, of course, have many people by giving away pizza, like we talked about. You can get people to line up, but then they're not genuinely there to be aligned with the king. And this is the idea of B'roiv Am. It's specifically Am, people who, quote unquote, have no thing to gain and are there purely because they want to be aligned with the king. And which of the names of Hashem, as we've talked so much about, that every time we have a different name of Hashem, it means a different aspect of Hashem that's being highlighted. This is what we've talked about, that we're introduced to Hashem with Elohim. And then it goes to the Yud Kei Vav Kei, all these different terms that we have talked about. Which name is indicative of Malchus? That's the name Adnis. Like we say always, obviously we don't pronounce it outside of a bracha, Baruch Atah, that's that name. We also say it, for example, Adon Olam, perhaps one of the most well-known poems in Jewish life. We say it every day in davening, and it's sort of an across-the-board term. Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzur Nivra. Translation, Master of the universe, who was the king before the formation of any creation. So Chassidus asks the obvious question, since, as we have just asserted, you can't be a king unless you have a nation. How could you be a king, Asher Malach, who was the king, B'terem Kol Yitzur Nivra, before anything was formed? Answer, it's that Hashem had the desire to be a king before he formed anything, and therefore creation is for Hashem's purpose, in contrast to thinking that it's for our purpose. So when we talk about Hashem, as we've also described, we sometimes fall into the trap of talking about what Hashem does for me. We don't talk as often, or perhaps we don't, as to what Hashem wants from us and why Hashem created the world for his agenda. So we say, Hu Shem Anis, Kihu Adoin Kol Haaretz. It means Adoin is just, again, like many of the terms that refer to Hashem, it's also a word. It means authority. In modern Hebrew, it's like the term for sir, Adoni, my sir, boss, this kind of thing. It means Hashem is the authority. The Nimsa turns out, Kimida Zoy, B'Shem Zeh, Hein Hamahavin Umakaimin Ha'olam Lios Olam Kamoshu Achshav. It is through the creation of this measured form that Hashem creates the world the way we see it, Shehu Achshav Yesh Gomer, which appears to be a yesh. It appears to be Dover Nifra B'fnei Atzmai, something that exists on its own. It does not appear to be, or it doesn't perceive itself at all to have any bittul, that's that key word, at all to Hashem. It appears to be a causeless cause, meaning when we see the watch, we presume there's a watchmaker. If there's a watchmaker, there's got to be a watchmaker all the way back until there's got to be something that is the cause that is not caused by anything else. And that's Hashem. This is how the Rambam describes it in the opening line of his book of law. The foundation of all foundation and pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a first being that causes all other beings. And that being is beyond being caused. You go back. At some point, there's got to be the original existence that has no prior existence. Now, human beings can make the mistake of thinking that they are that, meaning it just is. This is how it's always been. You ask a child, who pays the electric bill? I don't know. It just is. It just is. Life began with myself. It's always been this way. We've always had running water and electricity and, bread in the bakery, etc. We are fortunately very detached from seeing how bread is grown and wheat and all the processes that result in hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. We don't see that. We just think you go to the store, you get bread. It just sort of comes from wherever it comes from. So Hashem is the true causeless cause. There's nothing that caused Hashem, and he is the source of all. And we can fall prey into thinking that we are causeless causes, that we are the origin, the original featured entity. And that's what it means to be a yesh b'fnei atzmai. We consider ourselves our own absolute identity. So here we have this irony. We have Malchus, we have two completely almost oppositional characteristics. We have total involvement in the community with the Am, and total linking of self with the Am, and concurrent with a total sense of detachment from the people. And curiously, or I guess maybe this is consistently, this is the role of the Jewish people. We are to be fully engaged in the world, and yet we are to be completely detached from the world. We are not to become of the world, and yet we are to influence and transform the world. We are to bring the infinity of our identity into the world. And sometimes we get some pushback about that. They don't like that. They just want to be finite. They don't want to think about the causeless cause. And it's our message to bring that infinity to the rigidity of the world, and yet never become tainted by it. And it's a tough level. We often use the analogy of oil, which has a lot of meaning in Torah, that oil will saturate everything, and yet it will always rise to the top. You can't mix it with water. It will always separate. So it saturates and separates. And this is ultimately how Hashem is with us and how we are to the world. Were Hashem to pull back on this aspect, this desire to be connected with us, if not for Hashem creating at least this impression that there is a separation, that there is a detachment, that there is space between the finite and the infinite, then the world would be overwhelmed by its infinity, and it would subsume itself right back into it. Every parent knows this intuitively, because when you take your child to whatever their first day at school, so there's a separation. The parent needs to allow the child to have their own space, like we call it, their own identity. And the parent also needs the child to know that the parent is supportive, they haven't abandoned them, and yet not overwhelm them. So we are imperfect, and sometimes we over-present ourselves or we underpresent ourselves. Sometimes the child feels that we've abandoned them and we've left them there by themselves for something that they're not capable of, and maybe we have. And sometimes we're too present and we don't allow the child to develop at all. So were Hashem to pull back the Malchus level, we might either feel overwhelmed by the infinity of Hashem and therefore become batal, or abandoned by Hashem and therefore become completely detached and jettisoned. So this idea of Malchus is the meeting point between the infinity of Hashem and the finity, the limited characteristic of ourselves. That's why Hashem, again, he can do whatever he wants, but Hashem allows us to talk about it as if there's a structure and rules to it, but it's important that we remember that this is only the way Hashem created it. That's why Hashem creates the world in a process that allows us to have glimpses of Hashem and yet not be overwhelmed. So there has to be the creation of time and space. The most fundamental elements of existence are time and space. Bereshis, in the beginning, the idea of creation of time. Shamayim va'aretz, space. V'hine gedru b'chinas shem olam. In order for there to be olam, now remember the word olam, we translate it as world, but it also means to cloud the overwhelming infinity. Too much awareness of godliness shocks us out of our opportunity to be in a relationship with Hashem. So you need to have time and space. So again, we have a tendency to think that those are causeless causes. There just is time and space. What was there before creation? Well, we can't talk about before creation. There is no concept of time without creation. There is no concept of space without the creation of space. So we're constantly juggling these terms. And again, we could fall prey to the presumption of causeless causes. And this is reminding us there are no causeless causes. So even time and space have to be created. So we have these different phrases. We have time, we have space, which is up, down, right, left, all around. That is the four directions and up and down, horizontal and vertical, 3 dimensions. And we have time, past, present, and future. So again, these are also creations. There doesn't have to be time. These don't have to exist. These are innate creations. Well, I don't know if innate is the right word. These are deliberate, that's a better word. These are deliberate creations from Hashem, which give us an opportunity to function, because we need there to be past, present, and future in order to function. Curiously, we note this because, as we'll say in a couple of lines, in the description of Hashem's authority, as we'll see. All of these levels, time, space, they're not linked to any of the midos of Kedusha, that is the earlier spheros. It's only in the Malchus level, it's only where Hashem interacts with the world. Again, I mean, we could think of analogies in our own life. When a parent is interacting with the child, they sit on the floor and they play blocks, or they go through the aleph bays, the very simple levels. These are not innately part of the parent's reality. This is only part of the parent's reality in their interaction with the child. So they squat down, they sit on the floor to interact with the child. That's the Malchus level. So on the one hand, you say, well, look at this adult who's scholarly, who's developed, who's mature, and they're sitting on the floor and they're playing with blocks. So on the one hand, yes, it is a diminishment of the parent. On the other hand, this is the ultimate obsession of the parent, is to be connected with the child. The child, on the one hand, sees the parent interacting, and yet also wants to know that the parent knows that this is not real, that this is something that the parent is outside of this level. The child doesn't want to think that their parent is a 4-year-old like they are a 4-year-old. That would be overwhelmingly frightening. On the other hand, they don't want to think of their as their parent as being unapproachable as being so separated and distinct. Okay. And where is that? That's the Malchus level. So we say that Hashem is king over all four corners of the earth, up and down, three dimensions. So too in time, we say Hashem Melech, Hashem is the king. Hashem Malach, Hashem was the king. Hashem Yimlech, Hashem will be the king. So again, from our perspective, this is the greatest honor, the greatest compliment, the greatest exaggeration of illustration of superiority. But that's like the child saying, my parent is the best puzzle maker or the best block player. It's meaningful in the child's perspective, but it's not really descriptive of the parent. It's descriptive of the parent's interaction with the child. It's descriptive of the malchus, the relationship level, the relationship characteristic, the relationship quality. It's not descriptive of the core identity of the person. It's descriptive only of the relationship quality, not the essence of the person. And that's why it's always referencing the melech part. So again, in an ironic way, describing Hashem as a king, except for the fact that that's what Hashem wants, is a form of diminishment of Hashem. Like the child saying, my parent is the best peanut butter and jelly maker. It's an actual story. There was this, it's a long story, but this little girl, she sees this Hasidic guy and she walks over to him in the sweetness of a 3-year-old. And she says, you know, he's wearing the short knickers with the socks. She says, I like your tights. So she means it. It's sincere. But again, it's that because you're complimenting through the eyes of a child. So why is it acceptable? Because that's what Hashem wants, just like the parent wants to be connected in a relationship with the child. The fact that the parent is a scholar and the fact that the parent has got all of these other capacities and accomplishments, it's not meaningless, but that's not meaningful to the child, because to the child, the fact that his mother is a PhD is not directly relevant to the mothering, the relationship aspect of it. And that's why whenever we reference Hashem in space and time, we're talking about Melech. Hashem was the king. But again, it's the king characteristic. That's the key word, is this idea of of Hashem being referenced as a king. The Nimsa turns out, Shechayis Hamakoim, that which sustains the concept of space, which again, we have a tendency to presume to be a causeless cause. It just is. We're now reminding ourselves that that is also a cause. It is also a consequence of some other cause. The Chen Chayis Hazman, and the life force that causes time, again, something else that we just presume exists. The Savusam and their very existence, not only their maintenance, but their very existence, Miyayin Liyash, from no thing to something, the Kiyumam and their sustainability, calls man Kiyumam as long as they are being sustained, who Mimidis Malchusa Yisbarach, is from the quality of Hashem being the Melech. Again, it's only the Malchus level. We presume it to be a quote, I'll call it reality, by which we mean an independent reality. And the pushback is it's not independent. It's its own reality. It's its own causation. It's a product of Hashem's conscious decision. And that's why it's related to, it's described, it's coordinated by the name Adoin, authority, boss. And yet, this is the point that we're saying, that the Malchus level is not some sort of shallow, disregarded authority. It is tied into the very essence of it. Again, the difference between a perfunctory obligation, like, I don't know, putting a quarter in the meter, which is not the person's true identity, and the very menial tasks of parenting or much of life, where that is the objective. So again, the parent-child relationship. The child looks to the parent and just sees the very menial tasks that the parent performs for the child. They appreciate it, they like it, and then they sort of surmise that that is the entirety of the parent, that they are this perfunctory performer of menial tasks. And yet, those menial tasks are the ultimate expression of the relationship between the parent and the child. They're not just busy work. So again, you could hire somebody to do some of those things. You know, there's an old saying, you can hire someone to mow your lawn, but you can't really hire someone to read to your children. Why not? They may be a better reader. Maybe they can read better books, and maybe they can read longer books, because it's not about the reading. It's about the interaction between the parent and the child that is manifest through the menial task of reading. So the Malchus level is connected. And therefore, even within the most elementary parameters of human existence, time and space, are batelim b'metzias mamish l'gam husvas musa yisbarach. They become totally batel before the infinity of Hashem. People are familiar with the Holy of Holies, that it was measurable, it had to be built to specs, and yet it was immeasurable. And that if you measured from wall to the ark, and then you skip the space of the ark and measured to the other side, you got the same quantity as if you measured straight across. That doesn't make any sense, right? Why do we presume that time and space are absolutely rigid? Time waits for no man, but it does. Hashem held the sun up for Yeshua. Hashem made it extra hot. Again, we presume them to be causeless causes. That is, that they exist innately. And this is the reminder that they don't exist innately. They are totally batel, kibitl or hashemesh b'shemesh, like our favorite analogy of the sun ray, which appears to be identifiable and measurable. And yet, if we somehow try to separate it from the sun globe and box it up and remove it, it of course disappears. And this is the ultimate objective, the blend of apparent, if we call them opposites, or we certainly call them differences. Can we blend the two together? Can we see the infinity of Hashem in the authority of the routine? Can we see those two blended together? Infinite and finite. If we can match those two, we can bring those two together. Now we have genuinely done something distinctive. If we can blend the two together, we got to be able to bring those two together. Because Havaya, again, is the four letters that make up all the terms for tense, past tense, present tense, future tense, was, is, will be, all at the same time, which again is outside of human experience. He was, is, and will be all at the same time. And also time, space, not only time, but space. That the idea that Hashem is here, there, everywhere, and yet space has no confining characteristic. Kihu mahabit tomid is called bechinas hamakam kuloi milmailad lamatal adalit sitrin. Hashem is giving constant existence to everything, from top to bottom, and all four directions, here, there, and everywhere, continuously and Constantly. Even even though Hashem is innately beyond time and space. Hashem voluntarily, of course, everything is voluntary, but again, Hashem allows us to use these terms, but we always have to put in that reminder that we're talking about Hashem as He allows us to describe Him. Hashem voluntarily conscripts Himself to time and space. That is, Hashem says that Shabbos is Shabbos, and Yontif even more so, because remember, we are the ones who determine Yontif, based on the verified sightings of the moon, the insertion of the leap year. And yet Hashem says, I will respond. That if you determine that this is the day that Yom Kippur is, or Pesach, I will respond to the mitzvah actions of that day based on your determination that that's the day of Pesach or Shabbos, not Shabbos, I'm sorry, or the other holidays, and the times and so on. So again, while some, not Torah obviously, but people out in the world would mock the idea that Hashem is containable within the parameters of human time, we say that's the greatest gift of Hashem, that He conscripts Himself to it, like the parent and the child. What's the greatest gift of the parent? When they sit on the floor and play with the child at the child's level. This is truly the greatest gift of the parent to the child. Sometimes the parent wants the child to admire them for their accomplishments, which is a valuable thing too. And it's why a child is commanded, kabed es avicha, to honor, to give weight to their parent. Because since the child plays with the parent on the floor, they may think, okay, I've outgrown it, and my parent is still sitting on the floor playing toys. And they have to always remember that that is the parent in their malchus characteristic, so that they can be linked with the child. It's not the innate identity of the parent. It's one of the reasons why, just as another example of this concept, we have to be very careful to only use the descriptions that Torah uses to describe Hashem. As we mentioned, Moshe Rabbeinu describes the 13 characteristics of Hashem's tolerance. When he's campaigning for Hashem to tolerate the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf, Moshe gives 13 descriptions of Hashem's tolerance. So we are recommended, hey, only use those. Don't go making up your own, because you make up your own, you wind up saying, silly things. And here Moshe said it so you can rely on him. Why? Because since Hashem makes Himself so accessible to us, since Hashem makes Himself so engaged in human terminology, we could potentially become inappropriately casual and say, well, Hashem, I wouldn't mind, so why should Hashem mind? Which is the essence of, well, why would God care what I eat? In other words, I don't care what I eat, so why should God care? So I start to project my interests on Hashem. In other words, I think that Hashem should only care about the things that I care about. Because Hashem makes Himself so accessible and so embedded within our humanity, we can make the mistake of projecting out our humanity onto Hashem. So that's why we always got to recognize, and you could sort of see why some people were not so down with the teachings of Hasidus, because it was a little, I don't know what the word is, vulnerable to casualness, and they didn't like that. Now, again, the potential downside of the alternative is we make Hashem so great, we make Him irrelevant. I mean, He's so infinite, there's nothing to even talk about. So it's a very tough one. Okay. And again, this is sort of the Alter Rebbe bringing us back to this awareness. Hashem is not innately linked to time and space. Nevertheless, Hashem embeds Himself. This is the core of the Tzimtzum message, which is where we're headed, because we're always headed there. The core of the Tzimtzum message is that Hashem, and again, I'm using the words, voluntarily embeds Himself in this physical world and makes Himself accessible, and I'll use the word vulnerable to us, was he says, okay, I will respond to your eating matzah on the day that you declare to be Pesach. I will respond to your fasting on the day that you declare to be Yom Kippur. I will respond to the shofar sound on the day you declare to be Rosh Hashanah. So Hashem makes himself knowable to us. He makes himself embedded within time and space, but always remember that he is not innately confined by time and space. But it's a hard thing to remember, because either we think, well, Hashem, why would Hashem care? Or we think, well, Hashem and I, we're the same. That Hashem identifies particularly. He embeds himself in, he unifies his entire essence with the Malchus level, which is the rubber meets the road space of where time and space become a creation, they become an identity. This is that term that we describe as Yichud Tata. Yichud Tata is our perspective. It begins with us. I'm here. I wake up in the morning. I am. I am here. I exist. The table exists. The chair exists. Time exists. I am here. And then I spend the rest of my day trying to overcome my obsession with myself. You think about this as a child's life. A child is born. A child knows that they exist. And we don't expect anything other than that from them. As they grow and mature, our objective is, mind rules the heart, that we realize that although I exist and I want something and I am interested and that we can put aside ourselves. At first, maybe temporarily, we wait our turn, we wait in line, and maybe even in the long term that we bypass. We say, so you want, but somebody else wants, we're going to give it to them. We're going to overcome our innate desires. We're going to have a pushback against my impulses, this is what I want type of thing. So that's Yichud Tata. Yichud Tata means I begin with the presumption of the reality of existence. And I work to recognize that even this existence, even the time and space, which are seemingly absolutes, are also only the product of Hashem. The starting point, though, is my self, and not just me individually, but the reality as I see it. And we move from that reality, that the premise is nature, and that the innovation, the disruption of nature is a miracle. And we recognize that even nature itself is the product of Hashem. So I begin with that presumption, I begin with that awareness, and I use that to inch myself back towards an awareness that there is an infinity that is sustaining this awareness, that is sustaining this sense of existence. And that it's all only being funneled through Shem Adni, that the king is not just the king who makes sure that there's stop signs and taxes and an army, and my parent is not just the person who provides for me and tucks me in at night and takes care of me when I'm sick, etc. That my parent is there an identity beyond just how they service me. But again, the presumption or the starting point is, in fact, myself. That's the admi. That's the touch point, and then I work backwards towards it. We all know this intuitively, and we practice it routinely because we start off and we say, come for Shabbos. Why? Because the food's delicious. Come because of the camaraderie. Come. We begin with what's in it for me. That's how we begin. And then we work our way backwards, hopefully, towards something more infinite than just how it services my identity, how it makes my life enriched. Not that we're against that, but that's not the premise of it. That's Yehuda Tata. That's the oneness of Hashem seen from my perspective. Shilu of Havaya Ba'adness, that is the blend of the Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is beyond the routines of time and space. It is present, past, and future, all concurrent. It is infinity that is then blended with orchestrated reality. The Hainu, this means that the very essence of Hashem, that is called the infinite of Hashem, Mole as Kola Aretz Mamish, fills all the worlds literally. That the infinity of Hashem is present within this material world. Bisman, in time, umakum, and space. This is why, and we know this in Chassidus so often, we always have this a little bit in Torah of a tension between mitzvah observance and Torah study. Now, it's not one to the exclusion of the other, but there's always a little back and forth. On the one hand, we say you should put aside one mitzvah action, Torah study, for a mitzvah. On the other hand, we say that Torah study is greater. Torah study is equal to them all. The main thing is the activity. And there's a back and forth, a push me, pull me on these two aspects. Why? Because on the one hand, Torah study lifts me outside of this world. Torah study allows me to overcome and to the demands of materialism. On the other hand, when I do a mitzvah, I am illustrating that there is no conflict between materialism and holiness, that it's not one instead of the other. So it's not that Torah says, well, of course you have to enjoy yourself. Just do it in a kosher way. We say the point that when we use the physical object, it's not about self-indulgence that's tolerable, but we have a certain parameter around it, that it can only be in these areas. That's not the Torah message. The Torah message is that when we are engaged with the material, this is highlighting that it's not just material. An example, one that we've probably talked about before. The Gemara tells us that if a person benefits from this world without saying a bracha, it's as if he has stolen something. So the common understanding is, look, if I go into the grocery store and I want an apple, I have to pay him $1. So since the world belongs to Hashem, what gives me the right to take something from Hashem for myself? So I give him a bracha. But Chassidus doubles down and says, well, hold on. First of all, the concept of making a bracha before eating is not in Torah. In Torah, it's only a mitzvah to make a bracha after eating. Second of all, the analogy breaks down, because in the analogy, it's the storekeeper who sets the price. So who decided that saying Bori Priya Eitz is what entitles me to take this apple away from Hashem and put it in my and eat it? So Chassidus explains, it's not that when I say a bracha, I have now compensated Hashem in a mercantile exchange of goods and services for pay. Rather, when I say a bracha, I have now united myself with Hashem. Meaning, if I take the fruit and I eat it, so I've taken something away from Hashem. But when I say a bracha, I become one with Hashem, and the eating of the fruit becomes one with Hashem. And the infinity of Hashem is manifest in time and space. So that's a yichud tata. I see the apple, I see myself, I have an interest in this apple because I'm hungry, and then I recognize that by saying a bracha, I become unified with Hashem in that moment. And this is the reminder that in the heavens above and the earth below, in every corner, it's the same infinite Hashem. The same parent with all of their virtue is the same person within this child's play. It's the same Hashem down here as it is above, which helps us understand what we mentioned earlier. When the Alter Rebbe asked the question, what's with all the drama? You should know this day and take it into heart that the Hashem in the heavens above, the earth below, there's none other. What's that? Why is this so much drama for something that appears to be so obvious? It's so essential that there's only one God. I mean, you don't get all the way to the book of Devarim without realizing that. So what's with all of the buildup? So now we explain that we're not just saying there's one God. We're saying that it's the same Hashem in the heavens as it is on the earth. The same Hashem when Yom Kippur on Tuesday. The same Hashem at the kotel is in the bank. The same infinity that is in the most ordinary. Because even space, which again, we have a tendency to presume is a causeless cause, is also only being in existence because Hashem makes it so. It is through the midah of Malchus that it is funneled down to the rubber meets the road point of connection from the infinity of Hashem down here to the finity. That is absolutely unified with Hashem. What happens when it's funneled all the way down here? I mean, you think about technology, its simplicity belies its complexity. And that's the beauty of it. It's so easy, you could forget how much genius goes into it. You know, the old story, $1 for banging, $99 for knowing where to bang, kind of story. And why is that the case? Why is it that Hashem conceals himself so it's not incredibly obvious and overwhelmingly so? Because if it was, we'd wake up and we wouldn't have a sense of time and space. We've all probably had that experience. You know, you're so overwhelmed, you can't remember what day of the week it is. You can't remember where you are. It's so head spinning that it doesn't tend towards productivity. And since Hashem is not just looking to impress us, he's looking to be connected with us. So Hashem compresses himself into that which we can, as we say, handle. Because without that, there wouldn't be time and space for us. We wouldn't have the concepts of time and space. And without the concepts of time and space, we don't know how to function. So the interplay of nature and miracles, that they are all absolutely one, that it's not a separate Hashem. You know, as an example, a simple one, and again, each case is different and not easy for me to say, and so on. We don't believe that a person should be one name in shul and a different name out in the world. There is such a philosophy that exists, and again, it's easy for me to say that in shul, I'm Shloimi, and at work, I'm Sydney. Because just like we don't say, well, in shul, I have to be very aligned with God. But when I go to work, I can scratch your eyes out and lie and cheat because that's the way of the world. It's the same Hashem in the business as it is in the shul. It's the same Hashem on Shabbos as it is on an ordinary day. It's the same Hashem in holy circumstances as it is in ordinary circumstances. So what then is the difference? The difference is, what is the starting point? Do we see the world as an opportunity to see godliness? Or the alternative might be, do we see godliness as an opportunity to make the world a better place? I mean, which one, what do I begin with? Do I begin with the presence of the world, the existence of the world, and then use that as a looking glass into the infinity of Hashem? That's Yichud Tato. That's from our perspective. Now, what is Yichud Ilah is going to become the subject of the next section of this chapter, where it's looking at it from God's point of view, which we'll get to. But what we have come to here, hopefully, is to recognize that by describing Hashem as being subjected to time and space is not a diminishment of Hashem. It is the opportunity for us to be launched into the infinity of Hashem. All right, we'll stop here. Continue next Have a good Chodesh, everybody, and a good week.